Welcome to Wellesley's next 150 years. I'm thrilled to see each of you here in Tishman Commons to contemplate Wellesley's stewardship of original artworks, past, present, and future. As many of you know, Wellesley has been collecting art since its founding, and the Davis Museum now holds artworks that moved from College Hall to the Farnsworth Museum to the Jewett Arts Center before arriving at their current home. I want to begin by thanking Molly Sear, class of 2013, and Anissa Bouzian, class of 1987, of the Wellesley Club of France, the WCF, for bringing a proposal from Michael de Saint-Chiron of the Centre International de Recherches Andre Malraux, or CIRAM, to the French Francophone and Italian Studies Department and the Davis in 2023. Over the last few years, we have had many fruitful conversations that are now culminating in this special event, which coincides with the 50th anniversary of Malraux's death and the 150th anniversary of the college. Today, we come together to extend Wellesley's legacy of learning directly from works of art. We are welcoming participants from on and off campus, both in person and online, to propose new strategies for the ethical stewardship of artworks collected by the college since 1875. In collaboration with WCF and CIRAM, Pluralism Initiative, French House, and French Francophone and Italian Studies Department, at this symposium, the Davis pays special attention to the influence of novelist, politician, and cultural critic Andre Malraux on Wellesley's museum in the 20th and 21st centuries. Although not well known today in the United States, Malraux remains an influential historical figure in Paris, where the French Ministry of Culture has proclaimed 2026 l'année Malraux, or the year of Malraux. There will be over 130 events, exhibitions, and books about Malraux held in France this year. You had no idea. Megan did not know. Including a colloque next month on April 17th entitled Malraux, La Place de l'Art aujourd'hui, or Malraux, the Place of Art Today, which is being co-organized by the WCF and CIRAM. And yet, few in the United States have even heard of him. Sorry, Michael. He was the first Minister of Culture in France from 1959 until 1969, and an influential figure in UNESCO in the decades after it was founded in 1945. His novels, especially La Condition Humaine, The Human Condition, which was published in 1933, continue to intrigue Francophone literary scholars. Molly, Anissa, and Michael's proposal particularly interested me because in my scholarship on museums in Africa, especially West Africa, I analyzed Malraux's influence on the interpretation of African art in France. And in Africa, his impact on the governmental administration of culture, including through museums. And then by 2023, I was also ready to discuss the direct links to Malraux here at Wellesley. When Le Musée Imaginaire was translated into English as Museum Without Walls in 1949, one reader took great offense. As Malraux's fame grew in the early 1950s, John McAndrew, then professor of art and director of the Farnsworth Art Museum, knew that he must take a stand. At the 1954 College Art Association Conference, an annual meeting that many of us in the room know well, he presented a paper entitled The Non-Imaginary Museum, which was published in the College Art Journal the following year. In this essay, McAndrew defends one of his life's great projects against what he sees as Malraux's excessive enthusiasm for teaching from photographs. McAndrew was rightly proud of his work growing the collection of original works of art at Wellesley College. He gives concrete advice in this essay for raising money and making what he calls judicious purchases, in addition to soliciting donations. He concludes by remarking that, quote, Like the reproduction, the small, non-imaginary museum of a college is only a substitute, but it is an indispensable component of a college art department. Lectures, reproductions, museum, any one or two are incomplete, but the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts, and each can be made to offset the other's dangers, end quote. As we still aspire to create a whole greater than the sum of our parts, we are kicking the symposium off with a panel entitled Imagination at Non-Imaginary Museums, which we have organized in collaboration with the art department. Chaired by David Teng Olsen, this session features projects taking place at the Davis. Since their arrival at the Davis in 2023, Curator of Education and Public Programs, Semente has been leading multisensory learning opportunities for our visitors in close collaboration with Dave, Hannah Goodwin, Ted Ducas, and Wellesley students. And we're especially thrilled that Sara Brown, class of 2025, has returned to campus to discuss her contributions. This afternoon, Vinita Dutta will chair the panel Malraux in 2175, which the Davis is presenting in collaboration with Sara, the French House, and the French, Francophone, and Italian Studies Department. You will have the pleasure of hearing from Michael, who will be presenting the paper L'actualité du musée imaginaire et l'Asie in French, so news of the Imaginary Museum in Asia, with simultaneous translation to English by our colleague Hélène Bilis. So don't worry, if you don't speak French, it will be in French and English. And then tomorrow we'll begin with a collaboration with the Pluralism Initiative, which has had great impact on free discourse on campus through its What's in a Word series. I will chair this panel, What's in a Word? Repatriation, which brings together specialists on ethical stewardship in museums who will discuss case studies of repatriation and ethical returns in Ghana and Cambodia. Kwesi Ampene and Erica P. Jones have worked very closely on an ethical return of artworks from the Fowler Museum at UCLA to the Ashanti Kingdom. And Tita Long and Ashley Thompson will discuss how the nation state of Cambodia has pursued repatriation of its cultural heritage. And then during tomorrow's afternoon panel, Gandharan Arts at the Davis, which is again in collaboration with the art department, we will learn about 3 fragments of Gandharan art stewarded by the Davis that trace back to the collection of Buddhist art that helped solidify Malraux's status as an homme de culture, or man of culture, in Paris in 1931. In 1930, he and his wife, Clara Malraux, purchased fragments of sculptures from stupas in Hada, in what is now Afghanistan. They purchased those in Rawalpindi, in what was then part of British India and is now a city in Pakistan. Next, Andre and Clara shipped them to Bombay and finally to Paris, a route specifically intended to avoid the customs inspections of both the French and British governments. We will consider how the Davis can ethically steward these fragments. 70 years after McAndrew's furious article in response to Malraux, the Davis is no longer so small. But we are still decidedly non-imaginary, even as we inspire ourselves and others to stretch our imaginations. Many thanks to my co-organizers, the Wellesley Club of France, the Centre International de Recherches Andre Malraux, Pluralism Initiative, French House, and French, Francophone, and Italian Studies Department for bringing us together today. In addition to Molly and Anissa, special thanks to Melody Powell, class of 2011, and welcome to Wellesley, and thanks to Michael, of course. Liza Oliver of the Pluralism Initiative and Art Department has been an important supporter and thought partner. And we often work closely with our Francophone colleagues, but this has been a wonderful opportunity to learn even more, especially from Hélène Bilis, Jennifer Carr, Michelle Lee, and Stephanie Ponsavati. And special thanks to Davis Student Curatorial Research Assistant Nana Ama Asare Kwa, class of 2028, who has been instrumental in the preparation of this symposium. And I always owe a debt of gratitude to my colleagues at the Davis, and I want to thank the curatorial team for their enthusiastic contributions as organizers and speakers, Nicole Berlin, Alicia Bruce, Yuhua Ding, and Semente. My co-director, Mary Beth Tim, and our office manager, Shannon Nelson, have assured that the wheels of all logistics are turning smoothly. Our operations and visitor services staff always make sure that you can learn from original works of art in the Davis's galleries. Thank you to Tabari Abdallah, Mark Beeman, Helen Connor, Nell Gould, Bo Mumpo, Ann Penman, and Lynn Perlmutter. And our student employees, especially our student guides and student visitor assistants, are also assuring that you have a wonderful experience during this symposium. And we are also always grateful to the Wellesley College Friends of Art, who are true friends to the Davis and to each other as they learn about art around the world together and raise funds for the museum. Thank you to our co-sponsors, the 150th Community Fund, the Pluralism Initiative, French House Art Department, Religion Department, Susie Newhouse Center for the Humanities, and Africana Studies. And finally, I'm moved to share that this symposium is supported by the Mary Hammond Norton 54 Endowed Fund for the Davis Museum. Mary helped found the Friends of Art in 1965, and she remained a stalwart supporter and collaborator until she passed away just a few weeks ago. She and I had several recent conversations about the importance of streaming and posting recordings of Davis events so that she and other alumni could participate remotely, and she was looking forward to the live stream of this event. The orientation of the symposium toward the future reflects Mary's own imaginative optimism for the arts at Wellesley, which she sustained for many decades as a leader in FOA. She was among the advocates for a new building in the 1970s and 80s, and we are grateful to her and all FOA members for our current home in the Davis. Davis staff can still feel Mary's belief in the importance of our work, and we all carry that with us. Thank you to the Wellesley College Board of Trustees, President Paula Johnson, and Provost and Leah Gallen-Pourvu, 56 Dean of the College, Courtney Coyle, for your support of the Davis and all of the arts at Wellesley. And you can all look forward to hearing from Provost Coyle this afternoon. Be sure to take advantage of the tours and discussions in the Davis galleries during the afternoons. You will have the opportunity to hear expert perspectives from both Davis staff and student employees. And I'm now very pleased to welcome our first panel so that we can immerse ourselves in the innovations already taking place here at Wellesley. If only Malraux and McAndrew could see us now. I know that our colleagues and students' accomplishments have exceeded their most adventurous imaginative proposals.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello and welcome to the panel, Imagination at Non-Imaginary Museums. My name is David Teng Olsen, Director of the Studio Art Program and Co-Director of the Media Arts and Sciences Program here at Wellesley College. Thank you all for being here, and especially to the panelists, all of whom I've had the pleasure of collaborating with over the past few years. It is truly an honor to be a part of the Wellesley community for the last 2 decades. I've learned so much from my colleagues and students about what it means to study, make, and critique art and material culture. Working with this group has expanded my worldview in a meaningful way. It's humbling to be in conversation with such thoughtful, imaginative, and generous people. Throughout my life, I've been drawn to ways of learning that rely less on reading and writing and more on physical engagement, manipulating objects, and moving through space and learning through experience. I still remember my first visit to the Exploratorium in San Francisco, California, where science wasn't something abstract, it was something right in front of me, and I was a part of it. That experience has stayed with me. And in many ways, it connects directly with what we're talking about today. This panel is part of a broader symposium on ethical art and stewardship and the future of teaching with art. In the spirit of Andre Malraux and with his ideas, Museum Without Walls, we might ask, what does it really mean to expand access to art? Not just physically, but in terms of perception, interpretation, and participation. For me, this journey in accessibility became more concrete a few years ago when Professor Ted Ducas reached out to me to collaborate on a project exploring how new technologies might expand touch-based access to sculptures and artifacts for the visually impaired. I immediately said yes, and that collaboration has since grown into something much larger, spanning disciplines, departments, and ways of thinking. It really reflects the kind of deeply interconnected liberal arts model and makes a place like Wellesley so special. Accessibility is often framed as an add-on, but the work we've been doing and the work represented on this panel asks us to think differently. What happens when accessibility is not an afterthought, but something that shapes how we design exhibitions, how we teach, and how we imagine the museum itself? If the museums are educational spaces, then accessibility is not separate from pedagogy. It fundamentally shapes how people encounter objects, how meaning is made, and who feels included in that process. So rather than treating accessibility as a problem to solve, I hope we can approach it today as a set of ongoing questions, ethical, institutional, and imaginative one, and who museums are for, and how they function, and how they might evolve. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists in the order they'll be presenting. Our first panelist is Ted Ducas. Since retiring from Wellesley College in 2018, he has led several interdisciplinary projects connecting science, education, and accessibility. He digitized and published a series of 1970 talks by leading physicists, including Hans Bethe and Victor Weisskopf, with support from the American Institute of Physics. At Wellesley College, he collaborates with David Olsen, me, and the Davis Museum to develop 3D printed objects that expand tactile access for the visually impaired audiences. His work also includes teaching evolution using 3D models in partnership with the Perkins School of the Blind and creating, quote, math marketing, quote, a hands-on approach that connect everyday environments to math learning. I also want to add that Ted co-wrote the first season of 3-2-1 Contact, a science education TV show that aired on PBS in the 80s, and I watched and inspired my love of science. Our second panelist, Hannah Goodwin. Hannah Goodwin is a visual artist and experienced practitioner at the intersection of art and accessibility. As a manager of accessibility at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, she expanded and developed programs to increase inclusion and engagement. Her work emphasizes collaboration, flexibility, and multisensory approaches across diverse audiences. She has contributed to the Learning Exchange in Arts and Disability Conference and consults widely with museums and cultural organizations. She currently serves as a project manager for inclusive cultural projects at the Institute for Human-Centered Design. Our third panelist, Sara Brown. Sara is a maker, an artist, and a graduate of Wellesley College in Architecture and Women's and Gender Studies. At the Davis Museum, they served as 2024 internship coordinator and developed accessibility-focused, multisensory toolkits, later shared through the Susie Newhouse Center for the Humanities. Their artistic practice explores intersectional feminism, religious and queer identity, and embodiment through multimedia sculpture. Since graduating, they have focused on community education around accessibility, nutrition, and plan to return to the museum education. Presenting fourth, Semente. Semente is a painter, sculptor, performer, curator, and educator specializing in African diaspora arts, anti-colonial practice, and multisensory museum education. Originally from Sao Paulo, Brazil, they immigrated to Massachusetts in 1999. They hold a BA from Brandeis University and an MA and PhD in African and African diaspora studies from the University of Texas at Austin. A former John Walsh postdoctoral fellow at the Yale University Art Gallery. They are now curator of education and public programs at the Davis Museum. Thank you, and we will begin with Ted.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone in the panel, folks in the audience. Amanda, thank you so much for including me. Brian is here. I'll just show a little slide of you soon. I'm titling my talk, Imagination, Really. And what I mean by that, not only to link up with Andre Malraux, but also in two senses. One, to realize the imagined possibilities. And another sense is to make the objects of art more real in terms of making them able to be in direct contact with the students, with people with visual challenges. And so it really is realizing our imagination. This project is part of the larger project at Wellesley and at the Davis, which is to really address the multisensory possibilities, not just the addressing the interests and the needs of those with visual impairment. So I'll be talking just about that latter part of it and using, in particular, 3D printed objects. And since we're talking about increasing dimensions, part of my background in physics lets me talk about that. We're not just talking about physical dimensions moving into the third dimension, but other dimensions are brought in naturally with these objects. Culture, everyday and ritual, technology, history, religion, and I come back to design and function. And we have a couple of examples of this I'll be using. Also, I want to acknowledge Brian Burns of the archaeologist in the Classical Studies Department. He really, on his own, has taken some of these ideas and adapted them to an entirely additional technology civilization that has to do with the pre-Columbian civilizations in the what's now Peru. And I'll be showing a couple of his students actually doing stuff. This is just a list. I'm just going to go some examples of the things that you can do that expand the accessibility with these 3D prints. The first to emphasize is non-contact scanning. This is, in a sense, taking a three-dimensional photograph of something, so it doesn't require manipulating, handling the original objects any more than taking a photograph does. And here's an example of two of Brian's students, Destiny Eversole and Esther Song, scanning one of the objects. So that's also another sign of how integral the student engagement is to this project. I'm going to start off by showing one particular item. That's the white ground likithos, which was a vessel used to, in ceremonies having to do with funerals. And the design of the likithos, if I can, is designed, I'll have to describe it, doing my best. It's a tall, skinny vase resembling a cylinder. It has a high, narrow neck, and the function of that narrow neck is to have excellent control over pouring oil out in the ceremonies. It also has a slightly flared top on it, which enables you to fill it with more precision and more control. This one is just, I'll be showing it, here's an example of it, essentially this one. And it shows you just copying the shape. Now, already that's a major advance in the sense that people can hold the sample, see how it works, and when one makes a hollow version of it, you can see how easy and challenging it is to fill it up and empty it out. Now, another thing you'll notice on the actual artifact is that there's a two-dimensional figure on it. Well, one of the things that can be done is to turn that two-dimensional figure into a three-dimensional, into a relief. It's a little tough to see on this slide, but this is a likithos where the decoration on top and the figure on the side has been converted into a relief. So again, you can even take two-dimensional art and make it more accessible. Another example is an ope, which is basically a wide pitcher and with a single handle on it. And this one also has a design on the side, but in this case, it's been converted, thanks to David, into something that's a relief and also linearized. That sometimes it's challenging to see how it is in the curved surface of a vessel. Another thing that you can do is you can have smaller copies of something. Now, why would you ever want that? Well, one thing that you can do with these vessels is that it can make possible visiting groups of, say, 6 to 8 people on a touch tour of the museum and give each person an individual artifact to hold. And I illustrate here the ones on half scale because from scaling, if you're limited in finances, 8 half-scale objects to print is just using the same material as the single full scale. Now, another reason that you might want to have a smaller object is that if you look at some large-scale sculptures, even if you were allowed to touch it, you couldn't reach the whole thing. So a big plus is to be able to make a smaller copy of a larger original so that people have access to it. In fact, also for the people with no visual problems, it enables you to see it from a perspective that you wouldn't normally have. So just as you can make large objects smaller, you can make small objects larger. And this is one of Amanda's specialties, having to do with a bronze weight for weighing gold from Africa. And it's a small, about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And it has 2 cannons facing in opposite directions. And the challenge is, you see there's a fair amount of detail in that. But you can make that larger. And just in this case, it's been doubled. But it means that some of those details are easier by touch. And this shows you in inches for our American audience what it is. This shows you in centimeters for the French audience. I just turned the ruler over. It's another example of what's called a stirrup vessel. And stirrup vessels are challenging to describe. It's easier if you're allowed to hold it. But what they basically are is a vessel, an enclosed vessel, with a U-shaped, an inverted U-shape, so it's like an arch, hollow handle, and out of the middle of that handle comes a single spout. So these are, what I love about these, I mean, it's also challenging. Well, the one you see here, for example, has actually a relief on it, but one can enhance the effectiveness of that relief by having outlining the various features of it to make the contrast better. Because it's not just a question of people who are totally blind, but it's also to be accessible to people with limited visibility, visual acuity. And very often for people, the contrast is critical. One question that people raise is, what about the materials? Very few ancient Greeks or pre-Columbians had plastic. In this case, first of all, the point is that the shape itself goes a long way when you're talking about the function and the design of objects. Secondly, 3D printing is really coming along quite rapidly, and so we have a version of one of the other vessels in clay. The challenge so far is that clay can't be 3D printed in quite the resolution that the other materials can be. And there's 3D printing in plastics and in clay, wood, metals, and paper even. Again, I want to point out for this technology that it's accessible and relates to accessibility in more than one sense. Let me go back. One sense is, obviously, it increases the accessibility to the visually impaired. But in the other sense, it's accessible to museums without infinite resources. And I would say very few museums have infinite resources. Because it's getting less and less expensive. You can now scan objects with your cell phone. And very often it's not just institutions like museums, but schools, and people have them at home. So the whole accessibility to the equipment and the financial accessibility to museums. It absolutely fits into the Wellesley object-based learning. The ethical stewardship of art, just a quote from online, it goes beyond mere preservation to provide public access and considers cultural perspective on cultural value, but also the physical challenges. I want to point out that these advances in the technology are only realized when they're used in a thoughtful, informed, and inclusive engagement with art. And the next speakers, Hannah, Semente, and Sara, are key figures in making that a reality at the Davis. My appreciation to all here in the panel, the Davis Museum, the students, colleagues, and staff, and the Wellesley College community. This is just a slide from one of Malraux's books showing a photograph of a stirrup vessel, and you see how much more valuable it is to actually be able to hold one in your hand and see what it's like. And again, I just want to conclude by saying one moves from Malraux's Le Musée Imaginaire to the translation of Museum Without Walls, and I'd like to think of this project as addressing, by the Davis, a museum without barriers. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you, Ted. Just going to go back to this slide. Hannah Goodwin, everybody?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I don't have slides, so you can close your eyes or you can enjoy what's up there. First, I would just want to say how wonderful it has been to be part of this project, and I feel really honored to have had a conversation with Ted several years ago now that eventually landed me here with this amazing team and effort. So I wanted to talk a little bit, just tell you what my involvement was, and sometimes kind of continues to be, and use that opportunity to also talk about some of the qualities and contextual things that are important to think about when engaging in trying to make a visual institution more accessible to people who cannot make use of the visual. So I came in to advise kind of specifically on tactile materials, using tactiles with individuals who are blind or have low vision in a visual institution, and also with the goal of that we had really from our first decision that Ted and I had to see if I could work with you all, if that was a possibility, to organize a focus group. And that is really important. Everything I've done and everything I've learned is really because of working with the community, working with individuals who are blind or have low vision, and I am still always learning. So we had that in mind all the way along, and then also I had the opportunity to work with some of the students. So I was at the MFA for just about 20 years, and the MFA, like the Davis Museum, is a visually oriented museum. Most art museums are. Many museums that are not about the arts are also visually oriented, and that means that people who are blind or have low vision are kind of automatically left out. Very few institutions have things in place, not because of any ill intent or anything like that. It just hasn't been part of the focus. And tactile engagement is great for a lot of people and way beyond folks who are blind or have low vision, and it also doesn't work for everyone. So one of the things that I always think is critically important is to understand that a tactile experience is not a substitute for a visual experience, nor is a visual experience a substitute for a tactile experience. Both of those senses have remarkable properties that give us different kinds of information, and together they're really quite wonderful. So I have always been very committed to multisensory engagement for a variety of reasons. Multiple learning styles, different learning preferences, different abilities, different disabilities. With multisensory engagement, then you have the opportunity to provide a really wide range of opportunity. So at the MFA, one of the things we did have was a pretty robust touch tour, direct touch of sculpture with certain sculptures. And with the generosity of some of my colleagues in conservation, we were able to expand that. But even with some representation in every department or in every collection, there are still big holes. So temporary exhibitions, different types of things, works on paper, et cetera, et cetera. So we used a wide variety of tactile materials. So one of the things that has been interesting about this project and exciting about this project is the collaboration with the different departments, and including student knowledge, student experimentation, student learning, and student creativity as part of that. So I think that, let's see, how am I doing for time? I'm a terrible timekeeper, so I'm looking to David. Okay, good, thanks. So again, just really thinking and holding this idea, what are the properties of touch, what are the properties of visual experience, in mind as things move forward, and also recognizing for those of us who are sighted, the vast majority of us have absolutely no clue about how much we use our visual information to get about in our lives, to supplement things that we're doing. So if I touch something and I'm also looking at it, then I'm automatically having a different experience than someone who's touching it and who is also blind. So just to keep that in mind. So out of all of the many, many things that I've touched, including different types of sculpture and furniture and things like that, to understand them myself so that I can train people to lead these tours and assist people in engaging with them, I would say I have touched 2 objects where the tactile experience is very close to the visual experience. So, so that's one of the things that I think these fine people have listened to me go on about. And I just want to share as things move forward because I think it's a really important piece to remember. The other thing is not everyone likes to touch things. So intentionality, flexibility, and taking out the assumptions that we have out of the equation is really important. Not only does not everyone like to touch everything, but some people, including people who are blind, don't have enough sensation in their fingers to do that. So, for example, diabetic retinopathy, which is one of the areas in which many people lose their vision or their vision is altered, also may mean that you lose the senses in your fingertips. So then you have to, it's important to think about that. And one of the things that has been wonderful about this process is thinking through some of those things. If we want to give people an idea of the imagery, how can that be done in a way that's meaningful? Using visual language and description is a really important component of any experience and can include orientation to the object. It's rare that you can hand someone something, no matter who they are, and have them through that, just by themselves exploring it tactily, get the same information that you are intending them to get. So the act of exploration is always a wonderful one, but again, just to kind of keep these things in mind. So flexibility, intentionality, and connection, I think are 3 of the components that I advocate for in any kind of education program, and certainly with using tactile materials. And I just finally want to say that the tactile objects that have been developed and the things that are being used in the Davis Museum have so much potential for so many people, and that is one of the beautiful things about this project, is that it extends far beyond some of the intended participants, and wait, one more thing, which is there's all of this really great stuff happening here, and that another piece of it has to be to have that information always available to people ahead of time. So for any individual with a disability that might impact their ability to travel somewhere, go someplace unexpected, etc. They need to have information ahead of time. So that has to be part of the consideration and planning. And thank you very much.
Sara Brown, everybody.
Thank you, Dave. So my name's Sarah, and I'm going to be talking about how we make sense of art, unveiling object stories through embodied learning. So on this screen, there is an image of Dr. Patricia Hill Collins and Andre Malraux. Above them is a quote from Dr. Collins that reads, "Oppression describes any unjust situation where systematically and over a long period of time, one group denies another group access to the resources of society." When I was first invited to be part of this project by Dr. Semente, we grounded our work in Black feminist thought, most notably from Dr. Patricia Hill Collins' theoretic framework of Black feminism that is rooted in the lived experiences and knowledge of Black women. This framework recognizes the intersectionality of race, sex, gender, and class. These ideas served as a foundation when thinking about accessibility, as we needed to source our information and knowledge from multiple people and narratives listening to these lived experiences. Likewise, by focusing our attention and efforts on those most marginalized by systems of oppression, access is expanded to the greatest possible number of needs, meaning greater access for all. As this panel is part of a broader symposium inspired by the ideas and writing of Andre Malraux, I wanted to discuss and share how some of our foundation of thought is similar to some of his ideas around museums. Andre Malraux discussed ideas about a museum without walls, the imaginary museum. We experienced something kind of similar to this in the wake of the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, where museums saw a greater interest in virtual patrons, either as visitors on digital tours or perusing digital collections. This led to a renewed interest in the idea of a virtual museum, a concept similar to the musée imaginaire, an imaginary museum. Malraux describes this in The Psychology of Art as a conceptual view of mass-produced visuals, making items locked behind the glass more easily accessible without ever needing to step foot in a museum. His thought was that sharing the photographed sculptures and prints and other objects created a museum that exists in the mind, not in the physical, not within walls. The patrons that could access these quantity of works through these photographs and other replications could work through slides in a matter of moments than spending a whole day at a museum. However, as voiced by some of his critics, the idea of a musée imaginaire falls a bit flat when we begin to consider photographs as works of art. Likewise, the concept still remains in a two-dimensional way of thinking. While it does enable greater access to the visual work, it doesn't adapt to the diverse needs of those that are historically not granted access to these spaces, whether physical or imaginary. While this concept remains a point of reference for our virtual collections, some people see his claims around this as a radical claim to dispose of art museums. Regardless of people's interpretations, criticisms, or furthered beliefs in his work, Andre Malraux's works and theories can be argued to align with our panel's process and work in this project, but he was not our focus initially at the time. But we can be inspired, however, by his ideas and build off those as ways to access and learn about works of art, furthering that concept to a multisensory, engaged experience that invites all patrons to participate through experiential teaching practices. So that brings to the 2024 internship, Davis internship, where I was able to serve as internship coordinator and lead the group project. On screen, there is a picture of myself and my fellow interns, as well as Dr. Semente at Hammond Castle, and then the 2024 Tanner Conference, where myself and my fellow interns shared our work and involvement in this process. So our group project that summer would consist of two parts. First, a tactile toolkit that would be used as an educational aid by teachers, student guides, as well as individual patrons looking to enrich their museum experience through touch tours. We also wanted to create a digital tour that would be used in tandem with the bag or separately and it would prompt users to consider artwork more deeply and focus on an experience that invokes multiple senses. Each intern was tasked with choosing one object from a different gallery in our collection and coming up with ways to engage the senses. We started with a simple prompt, adding a new sense, asking ourselves how can a visitor engage more deeply with an object through touch, smell, taste, and embodiment. On this slide, there are 3 images of the sea sculpture from different angles, which was the object I chose for my contribution to the group project. I focused on the sea sculpture from the Cow Mau shipwreck as it's a piece of art that could pass as a modernist interpretation. However, it is fairly old and spent the last 300 years underwater. This piece is composed of several columns of blue and white porcelain cups fused together from the fire of a Chinese junk ship as it went down off the coast of Vietnam in 1725. The genesis of this piece is unique as it was formed by a cruel twist of fate and only discovered in the 1990s, 1998 to be specific, by fishermen's nets. The layers within tell a story of trade, imitation, and exoticism, as wares like these were mass-produced and hand-painted in China for markets in Southeast Asia and parts of Europe. Picking an object was easy, but there were challenges along the way as we continued to develop the tactile tools. On this slide, I have 4 images. 3 of them are 3D prints and tests of the sea sculpture, and 1 is a screenshot of a 3D scan of the work. This project was a major undertaking, as it was a labor that involved many steps and making a proposed toolkit that would be later reviewed and revised by various focus groups. During the internship, we were able to collaborate with the Knapp Center to use their 3D printers and editing software. The process began with seeing how many small stacked prints would appear if it made into miniatures. Then I used a mobile 3-dimensional scanning app called Polycam that would make rough 3-dimensional scans into digital files. Utilizing the Knapp Center's 3D software, we can pull out further details in these objects and print them with PLA filament, which is user-friendly, especially when we're in a very early prototyping phase. Another shout out to collaborate with the Knapp Center, and I have to thank them because they helped us along many scans and processes throughout the process. And I would like to shout out the Knapp Center for guiding and helping myself and my fellow interns through 3D scan training and more. But our collaboration with the Knapp Center didn't just end with the internship, but continued to the next academic year. On screen, I have a poster advertising an event that highlighted this collaboration, as well as images that include a scanning demonstration, a stirrup spout vessel similar to the one we have in front of us today, but this one was in the form of a sea lion, and various other test prints. During this event, students were invited to the Davis Museum to learn from Dr. Semente, Dr. Nicole Berlin, myself, other Davis students, and our fabulous colleagues at the Knapp Center. This 2-part teaching demonstration served as a way to show the ways we can incorporate advanced technology in how we learn and teach with art objects and their historic contexts. We were able to offer hands-on learning through the 3D printed pieces of jewelry from Dr. Berlin's Gold, Glass, and Pearls exhibition on ancient Mediterranean jewelry. We also were able to discuss the 3D objects myself and my fellow Davis interns prototyped, as well as an example in that center photo of how emerging technologies can help further projects like this. With the support of my colleagues, I was able to give an in-gallery adaptive talk about a moche syrup spout that resembles the sea lion. On screen, there are 2 photographs of said talk with a group of people and patrons around me where we were sharing various 3D tactile tools, and in front is the moche syrup spout that was the topic of discussion. Having these tactile tools on hand in the gallery can not only help patrons stay grounded during these physical handling of objects, but it can also enhance their learning of an object through cross-sections of said object. Discussions around the symbolic abstraction of its form and its utility in the U-shaped inverted handle can be articulated verbally. However, the information can be greater understood through physical tools like these. The cross-section of a stirrup spout can also further our understanding of why designs like these were prevalent along the northern coast of Peru. And the fullness of seeing the physical object can help us understand why there was little room or opportunity for the maize beer that was fermenting within the vessel to not evaporate or lose its ability to continue fermenting. So here on the screen, I have close-ups of me quite literally dousing cotton balls with essential organic oils, labeling scents on shaker bottles, and sorting out various tactile tools into piles. Projects like these require much attention and labor, and sometimes this means quite literally sitting on my boss's office floor, assembling shaker bottles of these various scents that relate to an artwork or an object's art historical context. Arranging tesserae or ceramic tiles into small containers, or sorting out silk cords, sea lion stuffed animals, and so many other objects. When I graduated, this toolkit was far from completion, but the tour and the bag were in continued development and prototyping phases, and I'm very happy to hear that since leaving Wellesley and the Davis Museum, that student workers and my colleagues on this panel have continued refining and sharing this project with the public, building off the foundation that was laid at so many years ago at this point, so that the Davis experience is more welcoming and accessible to all. So it then becomes the Musée Imaginaire is a museum question for us that doesn't really have a conclusion, but rather a question on how to continually expand greater access to all. In the spirit of multisensory engagement, I wanted to also share some of my personal work that relates to this. On screen, there are 5 images of a single work of art that can be described as an atmospheric sculpture that invites visitors to a moment of rest and reflection. In both my professional and personal work, I consider myself a maker. This work was part of my senior exhibition, as well as one of my capstone pieces that focused on performance and large-scale sculpture. Here, I ask what it meant to inhabit a body that resists containment, one that reclaims space, reshapes expectation, and honors the sacred in the soiled. There is a choreographed ritual we perform in worship and in communion. We lift our eyes to the heavens in prayer and lower our bodies in humbling prayer and worship. These gestures hold the weight of tradition, reverence, and discipline. In this work, I reinterpret those movements, reimagining what holiness can look like when filtered through bodies and experiences long left at the margins. Using materials from the architecture of sanctity, glass, velvet, wood, I construct a space that offers not penance, but relief. So, if you would like to hear more about my perspective or involvement in this project, more about my personal work, or chat about anything that connects the two, you're welcome to connect with me through email, on LinkedIn, or over a cup of coffee at some point. Thank you so much for your time, and I will hand things off to Dr. Semente.
Good morning. Yay! I come from a call and response tradition, so it means a lot to me that you give me your energy back, since I will be giving you mine. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Excellent. Thank you for being here early morning. Like many have mentioned, I'm Semente. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs, and my talk is titled Emerging Possibilities in Museum Education and Programming. So you heard a little bit about my background. I did not major in art history, controversial. I went to Brandeis for undergrad, and I did international global studies with a double minor in women, gender, sexuality studies, and Latin American Latino studies, and I had another major as well in African American studies. So I studied the context. I've always been a practicing artist, so you will get to see one of my pieces at the very end. And for me, my entry into the art world was very contentious. It was hard to see myself represented in art history classes or even studio art classes. And so for me, I wanted to understand the social, political, economic context of my life. I am originally from Brazil. I'm Afro-Brazilian with some Italian ancestry as well. And I came to the US as an undocumented immigrant at 6 years old. So that was, I wanted to know, why did I have to leave my country? Like, why am I not seeing the narratives of my ancestry just depicted in museums? But further, why do I see violence? Why do I see so much of the histories of where museums came from feeling like a harm to me and to a harm to those who are still here. However, I've always loved art, all kinds of art from everywhere in the world, and I love making art. So now that I've come to this moment in my life, my pedagogical approaches include mindfulness, embodied experiences, social emotional learning, and art making that are grounded in multiple perspectives. As Sara mentioned, Black feminist theory is a center to my work, as well as museum education theory. And so how did I come to that? One of my grounding books that has kind of changed my life is Freedom Dreams, the Black Radical Imagination. And so I remind us of that, since the panel is about imagination. What is an imagination of freedom? What does the Black Radical Imagination look like? And that book is by Robin D.G. Kelley. A quote from it: "Without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us." So instead of deciding that museums should not exist because of their history, which has now been co-opted by a very different agenda that actually works against the histories being told, right, about the world that we're seeing now, my idea is, how do we imagine the possibilities within what already exists to be a radical future and a revolutionary future? In addition, the first slide had a picture of me teaching in the portrait wall that you can see at the Davis Museum, as well as a black and red background. My grounding theories for this particular project, as Sara mentioned, Black Feminist Thought by Dr. Patricia Hill Collins, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds by Adrienne Marie Brown, Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom by Bell Hooks, and Discourse on Colonialism by Amy Césaire. So as Sara mentioned, this is Dr. Hill Collins, and 3 of the grounding principles of Black feminist theory is self-definition, intersectional identities, and multiple narratives. So that includes factoring in that everyone in the room has a different narrative and there's space for that, right? The self-definition, the ability for each person to share their narrative, and as Hannah was saying, what do you need? What do different people of different abilities actually need, and how do we incorporate that in our space? For emergent strategy, and I love this picture of Adrienne Marie Brown, take it in, she's got both her arms in the air, showing her strength. Next to her, there's a pink flower that is made up of petals in a fractal method, which is often how nature grows. Fractals meaning things that are repetitive and grow upon one another. And emergent strategy talks about that. So the practices of emergent strategy, which is an everyday practice that can be taken into all parts of our life. Small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small, right? Just like that flower, we build on what happens every day, even on the small. Change is constant, be like water. Sometimes there's a work of art that is not on view, and we have to pivot the plan of the tour. Change is constant. There's always enough time for the right work. There's often a kind of a way in which institutional spaces kind of further oppression by saying we can't. We don't have the resources, we don't have the time, we don't have the ability to broaden our work to include all these different groups of people. Well, if you believe in that work, there will be time for it because you make the time for it. There's a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can find it. And so in this moment, who you are can not be replicated. We can only get to what we need to get to because you are here right now. And so in my museum education tours, I emphasize that a lot. Perspective sharing, and really, what do you have to share about this work of art instead of me telling you everything about it and you having no room to have self-definition or connection. Never a failure, always a lesson. Self-explanatory. Trust the people. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. There's a lot of trust that's inherent in museums. We have Professor Daniela Rivera's trust signs that you can see in LL. Little plug for that. But how do you build trust among a group of people? And how do you sustain that trust? Move at the speed of trust. Focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resilience by building the relationships. Less prep, more presence. And what you pay attention to grows. Teaching to Transgress is a phenomenal book if you're an educator in any way, and my kind of favorite quotes there are, as a classroom community, our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another, in hearing one another's voices and recognizing one another's presence. The classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. And so I consider the museum an extension of the classroom, especially when it is on a college campus, but really anywhere, right? When you're coming into museum for museum education, you are essentially now in a classroom without walls, which my mentor Jessica Sack at Yale used to always say. And that slide had a cover of Bell Hooks' book with the quote on it. And finally, Discourse on Colonialism, which I do have all my student guides read for their training, because I think it's a super important way to ground the colonial histories of museum and understand this perspective of what we shouldn't have been doing in the first place. And so the quote from Amy Césaire that is like kind of my grounding within the museum work is, Europe would have done better to tolerate the non-European civilizations at its side, leaving them alive, dynamic, and prosperous, whole and not mutilated. That it would have been better to let them develop and fulfill themselves than to present for our admiration, duly labeled, their dead and scattered parts, which is often what museums were, right? That anyway, the museum by itself is nothing, that it means nothing, that it can say nothing, when smug self-satisfaction rots the eyes, when a secret contempt for others withers the heart, when racism, admitted or not, dries up sympathy, when it means nothing if its only purpose is to feed the delights of vanity. So that is not the goal anymore, right? And it has been the history of museums for a long time. So how do we navigate the vanity? Well, here's the vanitas. I didn't mean to make that transition, just worked out. So here we have a still life by Pieter de Ring, who is Dutch. And a work like this is essentially a display of European power, right? So how do we navigate those conversations? It's anti-colonial principle, but also make it accessible. How do we make it engaging? How do we bring people in? And so working with all of the collaborators that are here on this wonderful panel who have mentioned, especially Hannah's idea of like broaden it. See my arms in that picture? Broaden it. Like how do we expand one idea of like, okay, you can touch stuff, but you can also smell stuff, but maybe you don't want to smell stuff. So maybe you can think about embodiment, right? Like what are all the possibilities possible? So this wonderful crab tray came out of a collaboration with Professor Vinitha Gadiraju, who is assistant professor in computer science for her designing accessibility class. The students did that, and we are now in the process of mounting it near the painting, which is a huge success for the future. We also had consultations with a group of blind and low vision cultural experts, including Amber Piercy, who came back and touched the prototype and gave us more feedback around what's working and what's not, which led to the mounting at a very specific height and how I roll out the touch objects on a tour for a blind visitor and how to best really make it useful. Because if we have these things, but it's not useful to the people who most need it, like what's the point, right? So she's been instrumental in giving us that feedback. And of course, like Sarah said, Johanna Okerlund, who is in the Makerspace and Interactive Media is the Makerspace and Interactive Media Coordinator in the NAP Makerspace. And then this is from our presentation at the Back to the Radical Future, how emerging technologies help us better understand the past. Yes. All right, so from there, where Sarah graduated, students continued picking up. So this was done by Edith Bachman, who was the education intern in summer of 25, the next summer, and then translated by Juning Mao, who is right here in Chinese, translated by Carla Navarez, who did the Spanish version, and hopefully I'll do a Portuguese version. There's a student who already did the French version, but it hasn't been edited. Sorry, I wanted the French version to be done for y'all today. These are being printed, so I'm giving you a few like sneak peeks into the booklets as they come out, which they may be at the Davis today or tomorrow. This is where you start. You have the QR code for the Bloomberg app where you can listen in on the tours, and all of these stops relate specifically to the first summer internship project. You have a list of everything that's in the bag, including suggestions to go on YouTube to watch videos such as for the DIMBA, so that the object does not remain in the hypothetical, but you do see it used by the community. You have smell objects in there, you have touch objects. In fact, yesterday we were using rubber with a high school class, and we had a great time. So it's both connected to the specific objects that they chose, but then we've also added shelves so that, and thank you, Davis staff, operations for the shelves, so that other objects in the galleries can also have multi-sensory components, such as feathers for the angels in our medieval gallery, right? Shout out to Nana for that idea. And then within the booklet, you have little activities such as this. You have an invitation to engage with your whole senses, returning us to our humanity, right? All of us to our fullest humanity by remembering we are not brains on sticks, but we are bodies. we have all of these other senses that can be engaged with in an intellectual, institutional space, and it's not just what you think about everything, but how do you feel? What does it feel like to touch this? What does it feel like to smell an orange and remember what it's like to eat a juicy, juicy orange? And then think about how far that orange traveled so it could be painted from a tropical environment to this Dutch artist to paint a still life, and what else was happening on those ships and in those global histories with those crabs being transported. These are the shelves, these are the bags that connect to the tour, and you'll have an opportunity to engage with them if you come to my tour this afternoon. And finally, that is my work of art. It is my... Thanks, friend. It's my most recent self-portrait that I finished in January, and it also features Daisy, my dog who passed away a couple years ago, flowers, dried flowers, shells, objects that I've used in ritual or in jewelry, and then my big brain and what's really going on in there when I'm sitting there making a work of art that people can't see. So thank you so much for your time. If you'd like to connect to me or know more about my work, the QR code is there, as is the website and email. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for those wonderful presentations. This is the part of the panel where I'm going to ask a few questions to everybody. I'll start with kind of directing towards certain people, but I encourage you all to answer, every question that I ask. And I also open it up to anybody in the audience to ask a question as well. So kind of going off of what Semente just presented, I'll just start with you, and this is for everyone again. How does accessibility transform the way we teach with and through art objects? And just to kind of expand on, like you said, how does accessibility intersect with pluralism, whose knowledge and experience are legitimized, I think.
Okay. It makes it more fun. That's my first answer. Joy is a really important radical tool, especially in moments like now, but also the last thousands of years of human history, and especially the last 500 and so for me and my answers specifically. Joy is not something we were supposed to have access to unless it was performative for the viewership of the other. And so joy opens up a lot of possibilities. It opens up the desire to be vulnerable with each other without feeling vulnerable in a scary way, but vulnerable in a connection way. It increases the ability for people to take in information and other people's perspectives when it's coming from a joyful way. And it literally makes it so that people who wouldn't normally want to come into the museum actually want to come into the museum and have a good time. And they leave. Like yesterday, a young teenage boy left saying, "I would love to come to Wellesley College." And I don't typically gender people. This is a very boy, you know what I mean? Very cis man boy. From a high school group, and he was with his bros, and he left saying, "I want to come to Wellesley College." And I love that for him. In theory, but the desire to be in a space that you wouldn't even normally have thought to go into. And so that can be a range of people who are now enjoying an experience that they perhaps felt out of. Now, I do want to say that this is, again, an expanding project. It's an emerging principle like the fractal flower. And so there's a lot of room for us to still grow. I have a visitor right now in my inbox who is blind herself and wants to come in, but she wants to be independent. And I presented the resources, and she's like, "That actually doesn't necessarily help me walk around, and here are 2 platforms y'all might want to think about." So I'm going to bring this up at our next meeting, but we have a long way to go, but we've also made a lot of strides.
Excellent. Would anyone else like to address this? Hannah?
No, I just turned it off instead of on. After the careful instructions that I have. And why is that? Because I tend to learn by doing, and I didn't do it before. So I think that having accessibility in the mix reminds us, hopefully, that disability is part of a natural human condition. Actually, a very high percentage of people have disabilities, but also it challenges the idea of normal. And I think normal is one of the most devastating ideas to many, many, many groups of people, individuals, and that it has the potential to, I just lost my thought. It has the potential to, I think, remind us, all of us, but certainly myself and a lot of the people that I've worked with who were trained in, and I was not trained this way, but historically a lot of art museums focused on the transfer of information. I have this knowledge, now I'm going to give it to you. And I think working in accessibility can help push us away from that a little bit and not have the transfer of information be the center of something. And that has been problematic anyway, for a large number of reasons. And invite people to multisensory engagement and joy. I agree, the fun is important. Allows more people to bring themselves and their experiences into the conversation, which adds another dimension to learning. So, that's it.
Yeah, no, I will say, and Sarah, you can follow up, but I will say, after working with you all on this project, it even changed the way I even thought about the artwork that I make myself, right? Like I was making artwork that, was strictly visual, and I think it pushed me to, want to expand who the viewer is and who the people are that I'm reaching out to. So I just wanted to say that. And actually, when you bring an object out, I made these little sculptures for the piece that's in the museum right now. And in speaking about joy, when you reach in and you grab a piece of artwork in the museum, which you're not supposed to do, people got really, really excited about that. But yes, Sarah.
To pick up on everyone's shared responses, I would agree that there is this point of joy. One of my favorite things before entering this project was Dr. Nicole Berlin's Gold, Glass, and Pearls exhibition, because being able to not just look at this beautiful ancient Mediterranean jewelry, but pick it up and try it on, even though it didn't fit my wrist, it was really just a joyous idea, and that's the moment it clicked for me of this is a space that I want to continue finding myself in, and if I'm able to be a teacher in those spaces, I want to pursue that. And so to Hannah, your point of this idea of normal being very problematic, the identity marker of being disabled is something that is the only identity marker we can all find ourselves in at any point. So it's better to go in the perspective of not yet disabled, because in that way we can find ourselves as better listeners and better teachers, because we can be responsive to our learners. And so Dave, to your point, I also found my own artistic practice altered while working on this project, because while I did want to create these atmospheric sculptures, I was starting to think of how would this space be accessed by various needs, and how can I make more people be able to enjoy what I'm producing. So just to pick up on that point, I think accessibility in this idea of teaching with art allows us to be better teachers and put our learners' needs first.
Excellent. Ted, you got anything? You don't have to.
Is this on? Yeah. I just want to bring in another kind of engagement, and we didn't plan this, but you mentioned wearing jewelry. And one of the things that excites me about this particular set of opportunities is engaging in a dynamic way with the objects. And let me just, since I brought it up here, this is a kylix. It's basically a very wide and not very deep wine glass. And when I first saw this, and this is one of the first things that got 3D printed, I thought the Greeks are pretty smart, but why would you ever do this for a wine container? It's just, And then learning from Brian and others, it's better than that. They lie down on their side in the symposia and drink wine out of this. And it turns out that the difficulty in drinking lying down is part of the set of criteria for belonging to a symposium. So there's an example of sometimes some spillage, but still a dynamic interaction with the artifact. And it's true for all of these. One more thing. I mean, my ignorance in this whole thing was so great that almost anything that I saw was new to me, but also in terms of engaging folks with it. This design of a stirrup vessel lasted for over 1,500, between 1,500 and 2,000 years in what's now Peru. And it strikes me this is more standard. You can see this as a deformed wine glass. But this is more special in terms of what has to do with the culture, but also the physical environment. It's very dry there. So they have a design that prevents too much evaporation. It's a design also that from hydrodynamics actually pours very efficiently. It's easy to carry. But it's something that idiosyncratic, lasting for 1,500 to 2,000 years, was also a dramatic, this is not just living dynamism, but historical. So and we do that in physics all the time. We have equipment that's too old, so we say, this is a historical example of it.
Well, to start with you, Ted, what pedagogical opportunities emerge when we design for multisensory, cognitive, and cultural modes of engagement?
Well, it's too much me. But one of the things I learned by attending a conference, and Hannah was, I guess, in charge of the local committee at one of these lead conferences in Boston in 2023, was, and I mentioned it before, the idea of simultaneity sensitized me to things, meaning we can all look at this object together, but we can't all touch it together. So how do you make it accessible? And I started off saying something with a small group, but the idea of having each individual be able to have their version of it so that when a tour guide is describing something, well, that's the same thing sometimes we do I learned to apply it in physics where you have some simple, so I can't say too much about my teaching art. I don't know enough about art. I love art. I'm the son of an artist, so I feel connected to it in many ways. But the idea of having every student in the class be able to hold something, a device, a measurement device, and then go through operating it together, and as we all do, make mistakes together, but also learn about its function, what to do when something doesn't work. The dynamism of learning is something that I certainly learned from that conference and manifest in this project. Also, how much the students learn. Anyway, it's great.
Would anyone else like to? What's the question? What pedagogical opportunities emerge when we design for multisensory, cognitive, and cultural modes of engagement, which we've all been talking about, but just...
Can I just say, when we pull out the sea lion trajectory of objects, right, there's the stirrup replica, the full replica, just like that one, and then there's a cut through of it, so you can see how the liquid would have sat inside of it. And then I sourced from several SeaWorlds. It literally took 3 different SeaWorlds to get all of them. These little fluffy sea lions that are, super tactilely yummy. And when I pull the first 3D objects from the bag, right, I always make it like a magic show, what else do I have in here? They're like, oh, cool, now I understand the object better, I understand the history, and this has worked from middle school all the way to the college student. Then I pull out the fuzzy one, and the oohs and ahs, that I hear throughout. They're like, that makes me go home and have a good night, right? The fact that they got something they didn't expect. They learned about the Moche people. They learned about their beliefs. They learned about their medicinal practices, that the sea lions eat little pebbles, and then they would crush the pebbles and use it as medicine. How many people knew that? I didn't until I started researching this object. So the sea lion actually also has a ritual and spiritual meaning, like Ted was telling us. And then there's this sweet ah. And then eventually somebody might break it to them that they were also utilized for their meat, for their warmth, right? As with a chicken that you might eat at home. So all of these understandings, these international understandings of what different people have experienced, but also the sweet ahs of a soft, fuzzy sea lion.
That's great. Sarah, do you have an example too from when you were doing these multisensory tours at the museum that brought up some
It's
fun
quite
stuff?
literally the same concept, because during the Back to the Radical Futures teaching demonstration, it was about the sea lion stirrup spout, and having the cross sections was helpful to show the interior of the object. But something about a stuffed animal is going to just bring everyone joy, and if you can be more joyous in your learning, then you're doing a good job as an educator. And so I'm only on the start of that career, so seeing that being successfully implemented encourages me to think of all the new ways we can keep doing that and develop it. So I don't know, there needs to be more joy in education, so it's very happy to see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think multiplicity in any form in a museum setting is awesome. You know, the potential for connecting with people who, from an accessibility point of view, connecting with people who you may not know have a disability. I mean, the vast majority of disabilities are invisible. We know that there are a large number of brain-based disabilities that are not thought about. So, but multiplicity, you know, you open many doors, but I also think you open doors for people to bring something new in. And so I just really briefly tell a couple of few short examples from my experience working with people in museums. And one was this boy, a teenager who, from Perkins School for the Blind, and he was a musician. He sang, and eventually he got to the point where he contributed singing throughout a tour. He would invent songs in response to different things that we were doing, and which was fabulous for everybody, and also anyone just brought, people so enjoyed it. People who had nothing to do with the tour, you know, really enjoyed it. And another example was, I was not there, although I happened to pass by the gallery while a tour was happening, and there was a Brazilian artist, and there was a scene of dancing, and one of the visitors said, "Oh, I can just hear that music." So the tour guide said, and he told me later, he said it was totally spontaneous, you know, well, maybe we should dance. And so everyone started dancing. And one of the people on the tour was Brazilian, and, you know, I mean, it was completely unexpected, and again, brought a different layer of learning to that art object, you know, so, and just a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I'll kind of like answer for Ted and I. So, you know, when we started making these three-dimensional objects together, you know, it was actually really kind of difficult for us to get folks to teach with them, right? For reasons like, oh, you know, 3D printing is bad for the environment, you know, it's not like close enough to the real object, so on and so forth. And, you know, so and Brian's not here to defend himself, but we went to Brian, and Brian was also very, you know, I don't know if I can use these things, but let me bring him to class. And he said that, you know, when he brought him to class, it was amazing. You know, our intention to make these objects was for the low-sighted and the blind, but he said it was incredible, like, what happened in that, like, little experience with the objects themselves, and the students, you know, learning more about it through, you know, what we had like a different expectation, but it totally changed. You want to add to that? Yeah.
No, I just want to say it's a wonderful thing, and it connects to the idea of accessibility of these technologies to smaller museums, meaning the fact, and this, anyway, that people can, it affects more than just the people who are sensory challenged in certain ways. It opens up new possibilities for the larger group of visitors. And the whole point, the examples you were giving, says that that's sometimes for museums and other institutions to adopt these techniques justifies their expense more. That if you just say, we're only aiming at this particular population, which should be justification itself, it's not always justification that's sufficient. So the idea of having it fit other contexts, which is really spread more than just the wonderful descriptions you gave, and you gave, moving more than just literally and figuratively moving, were just great, and examples of that. So it actually has, not only it spreads, but it makes it more accessible to be adopted.
Excellent. My next question is, what was one thing that you learned from working from another? As I said before, I learned so much from all of you. It's very, very humbling, just knowing that, there's a real sense of vulnerability when you go into a field or a way of learning that you're not familiar with. And I know that, like, when Hannah, when you brought us together with the first focus group, it was very, very, just mind opening and just changed my perspective to, like, really understand that, people do have very, very different experiences. And this is across, like, the entire, gamut of experiences of people's lives, but just for the low-sighted and the blind. To think about, some people are born without sight, some people lose their sight, some people don't have feelings, some people didn't like touching things. All those things, like, really, really affected kind of how I, don't bring as many expectations as I used to about, like, thinking what was, like, quote-unquote normal. And I will just say, teaching here at Wellesley College is also really important to that. When I came here, I was teaching art that was, like, the art that was taught to me. So it was like, just, cis white males and, classic arts, but I was looking out in my classroom and, that was not what was there. And I think, this is, like, added, like, another layer and dimension to that. So I just wanted to share what I learned from you all, and when I was reaching out to see what you've learned from each other. I didn't direct it to anybody.
So starting out as a student in college, joining this project, I learned two major things. One's a little vulnerable. So being a student at the time, everything is done very quickly. If I have an essay, max deadline is 3 months. Everything is a very quick turnaround. So coming in to be on this project was a lesson in patience, and the reassurance of all my colleagues here was very helpful, because in my mind, I'm thinking, we're working on this, it should be done, but I think it's just this lack of, at the time, realizing how much labor is involved in an undertaking like this and how many people and hands and minds need to be involved in that. But on a broader sense, seeing how our varied areas of expertise and backgrounds in education and teaching and art or physics and various other things, myself, architecture and women's and gender studies, museums never played a role into that until I entered them and started seeing ways that could happen. So it just further helped me understand the ways intersections in these areas of academics can further facilitate accessibility in its various forms.
I have learned so much from all of you, and I'm so grateful for it, truly, truly, truly. Whether it's Dave and your ability to kind of produce the materials and the process behind it, the options of, like, the wood burning versus the 3D printing, those are all things I knew nothing about, not super technologically savvy. So to witness that and be able to kind of send my students to you to learn from you has been amazing, and then to see how you incorporate it into your own art. Just yesterday, a student passed by your piece and was like, I didn't know there were 3D objects in there. So, like, the surprises keep on coming, and the joy from all the ways you include this work. Ted, your science background, your deep understanding and research behind accessibility and what other institutions are doing, whether it's libraries, be able to check out objects, engaging with teachers directly and seeing how we can further that engagement in the classroom, not just by bringing them into museums, and just, like, the science overlap to the arts. That's been so beneficial. Hannah, everything you've taught me that I'm still learning from you around accessibility, around the many different needs, the assumptions that we hold that don't necessarily translate into the needs of actual visitors. And, like, Hannah came in early on in the project and did multiple sessions with the student guides as well, having them experience touching objects with their eyes closed. And it was, like, different things she brought in. So this is pre a bunch of 3D printed stuff, like, just what can you even tell what this object is when you're touching it in a brown paper bag? And then extending it into working with blind or low vision visitors with a dog in the museum, museum and helping to guide folks around physically in the museum. Like Hannah has just taught me and continued. Every time I see her, I'm like, can I ask you a question? So literally in so many ways. And Sara, your ability to take the different fields you come from and incorporate it into the work you did here, always asking me really deep questions, and trying to figure out also how to best bring in your peers, because Sara was responsible for helping to make sure that the other summer interns were working on this group project kind of in a cohesive way. So all of your leadership as a peer was also extremely impressive to witness. And like, the visitors have taught me a lot. The other students who teach with the work after a tour and they tell me how it goes, or even like the response of guests in a moment. Sometimes things don't work the way I think they're gonna work and I have to pivot. So every day I learn something new on this job, and from this project to everything else I do, I never go home without learning something new, truly.
Well, if I could follow up on that, just because Semente is a perfect example of, I think, I haven't thought of it quite this way before, but in the, what do I want to say, the improvisation world, that one of the key things that people say is yes and. In other words, if somebody's talking about coming over in the Mayflower, you don't get to start talking about Cleveland football. And the idea of just bringing something up to Semente is an example. I mean, just to see how her personality, her knowledge, and all of it engaged in adding dimensions to the whole project is something I learned about. Just keep expanding the dimensions. And the willingness of people in the community to just be part of the whole enterprise is, I guess I have to say, having been here almost 50 years, if you count even my retirement in there, it's no longer surprising, but it's a pleasure to see at Wellesley.
Oh, I've also learned so much, some of which would overlap with things I think each of you have said, so I'll just pick a few things. One is how from the first conversation I had with you, you held just the way that you operate everywhere with inclusion at the heart of it, you know, where everyone counts, everyone's noticed, you know, and I just love that, and the endless thinking and and there are a couple of things I want to say that bridge all of this, but which I will in a minute. Your leadership with the students and with the group that I saw you with was just it was delightful, and also I just, you know, learned from your approach of being here in the moment as a student and being so aware of what other students were dealing with in that moment, with wherever you were in the semester and everything, I thought was really great. And the iterative process that I don't know if it's from physics or just, you know, but both of you, this willingness to try things and then try a different version and then try a different version and try a different version is just, it's fabulous. The dedication to it, whereas usually it's people want to jump ahead, and I can be one of those people that want to jump ahead. But that process, I think, has led in so many good directions, and the trust that you have, and the David, the work with your students in opening things to ways for them to participate and trusting them has again, there's something that happens here that is, from my perspective, a bit unusual in terms of how students are within the museum, how students are able to build their own capacity and the museum's capacity. I'm more familiar with situations where students are taken kind of on a semester by semester basis. Okay, this is who's here now. And the continuity this is something that has, with all four of you, the continuity has been such a great example of how much more possibility that you can bring when you have that, when you're not thinking about just the short periods of time, but always building on something. So.
Yeah, this is going on.
Couple more.
Yeah, yes.
Just two things. First of all, I want to talk about Hannah is part of the project, and part of the irreplaceable nature of what you've contributed is genuine, not only, of course, the genuine feeling and compassion, but expertise in the field of dealing with multisensory opportunities and challenges. That's irreplaceable, and we can have the best will in the world. It just won't happen if we don't engage with somebody who makes the key step possible, the idea of connecting to people actually who benefit from it. So I really learned that and appreciated that. And I just want to say something, because he keeps flattering people. I mean, saying nice things about people. I'm going to say something nice about Dave. You can imagine something and Dave makes it happen. It's just when I said, oh, well, you know, you can have something and turn the 2D image into a relief, he did it. And it would be nice if we could make one of these actually be hollow so we could see how the fluid flows or experience that. He made that happen, because just scanning the outside, it doesn't automatically make the whole thing hollow where you want it to be hollow. So connecting to the world beyond Wellesley, as small as that might be, but the world beyond Wellesley with that real expertise, and taking advantage of the cross-cultural, look at the cross-section of people here. I mean, they even allowed a former faculty member to be on here. So, no, it's remarkable, and it is, well, I'll give an example and then I'll shut up, but you don't have to believe me. I mean, we first met each other years ago when we were considering having maker spaces at the college. And the first example we had at Wellesley in a 3D printer was in this kind of nascent engineering space. And that was made possible by the, I have to say, enlightenment of the administration of the college to support that. And of course, when we started doing it, the 3D printing was engaged, having to do with engineering education. And all of a sudden, we had these amazing students coming over saying, I have this file here, can I 3D print it? You know, because they knew about 3D printing from high school. Okay, so we had people from art and architecture coming over, and that itself was just a broadening thing. And the fact that Wellesley has the resources, human and otherwise, to make that cross-cultural connection, inadvertent alliteration, the cross-cultural connection possible is what's special about it. And it can act as a kind of R&D. We can show the possibility of certain things that other institutions may not be willing to take the risk to find out. And already you see some of these things spreading out, even though it's not as if we were the only ones doing anything like this. But I really appreciate this whole continuing experience.
Thank you so much. As my kids say, you should just glazing. That's like the new way of saying here. Anyways. So, you know, we're kind of running low on time, so I'm going to kind of combine. I'm going to ask these two questions, and you know, you can ask them both, answer them both, or ask, you know, or just one of them. So here they are. What are your plans in the near future related to accessibility, and what gives you hope right now in this space? So, Sarah, would you like to start? Like, because you were kind of thinking about coming back into this world.
Of course. So, for me, I am continuously and actively pursuing roles in museum education, but I tie everything I do to this idea of expanding access, which is something that in my current position where I'm nurturing the wellness ecosystem of my town and my community, I want to continue expanding that access of wellness, of good food with those in my surroundings, but at the same time, finding roles and positions similar to what I was able to do here at the Davis and continue expanding that in future endeavors and careers. But your question about hope, I think just the fact that we are all here today having this conversation and that there's an interest in what we have to say and what we're sharing and developing, and it's not unique to just our situation. This is the idea of accessibility in a museum space is interpreted differently at many institutions, but the fact that many minds and hands were involved in this process, all with the same goal in mind, is what gives me hope, because there's so much happening in the world right now But the fact that we all can come together and build off each other's work and experience is something that I find really inspiring, especially since I'm on the other side of careers of kind of entering that. So seeing how we can come together is just really encouraging.
I feel very hopeful to see a project come into physicality. The bags and the shelves and the things and how you're going to use it. I got a lot of questions of those natures at the beginning because it was all in my brain. And like they're like, okay, we brought this to you. Like, how are you going to use it? And I'm like, we're gonna use it. We're gonna figure it out. So I found those bags in my office. Like they already existed. So I was able to also be like, oh, okay, my predecessors were kind of working on this, and I found some corn husks and other random things like silkworm pods. And so, finding things in my office, and then moving forward and seeing, the museum come together and help us make this a reality on the ground. Shout out to Nell for the shelves. Thank you. And all of, seeing it come together after kind of moments of being like, no, it's possible. I swear this is possible, y'all. There's gonna be shelves and there's gonna be bags and I promise you it's gonna make sense. And then seeing it and starting to see the classes use it and the student guides use it. All of that gives me hope. All of y'all give me hope. What am I doing? Continuing to expand this work more and more accessibility, more inclusion, all the ways. Open to consultations and workshops all the time. Scan the QR code. And continuing to make art that also is about embodiment and about ritual and about the full human spectrum of what it means to be alive, and making sure that those who look like me are still represented in those narratives of what it means to be human.
Anna?
Oh, I'm going to attempt to be concise. I'm not always good at concise. For what I'm doing now, or in the near future, this is my everyday. So on a personal level, on a professional level with my job, and then as an artist, always trying to, figure out more. I can't separate accessibility from anything. So yeah, there's that. And hope. Any situation that welcomes people and everybody in a loving way gives me hope. And that's definitely happening here.
Dan?
Well, I'll give one example, and part of the point is that, of my point is that Wellesley is a community that can act as whatever metaphor you want to use, as a laboratory or a hothouse for developing things. And in and itself, it's wonderful. But if it's only valid, if it only works at this institution, it's great for Wellesley, but it's not indicative of Wellesley's history and tradition of leadership. So one example, building on the fact that Wellesley had committed to involving themselves in this project, I should say ourselves, I worked with Maddie Nelson at the DeCordova Museum, which is just to the west of Boston in Lincoln. And they're best known, or certainly well known, for the sculpture garden. And the challenge there, even normally people can't touch them, but even if they let you touch them, you can't reach the whole thing. And some of them are extended over space. And having talked to one of the folks there who gave touch tours several years ago, they picked one installation that they would suggest as kind of a model. And in contacting the person there, Maddie Nelson, it took her, I don't know, some small fraction of a second to get it. And so now we have, for one of these installations, 3 smaller models, one 24th scale because it's a fairly large installation, but in which a touch tour is possible. And again, the idea from this is that those might be colored in different ways because different people have different contrasts that work for them. So giving the possibility of a small group at least being able to touch something. And for other visitors in general, you can't look at that from the top unless you wind up, I guess, having drones flying all the time. But it just offers another example of kind of generalizing it from the person who is there at the institution, sees the value for her particular purview and connects it with the rest.
Excellent. Well, we're right on time. Thank you all. I would like to thank our panelists once again, and everyone here for being a part of it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm so proud to work with every one of you, and I want to thank you for showing all of us how imagination can be an embodied, multisensory, collaborative, and generous action. So thank you. And I want to remind everyone to take advantage of exploring some of the objects that are over on the tables. Have really been gathered from a team. Most recently, two of our students, Carla Narvaez and Yerume, made sure there's some brand new 3D prints over there, so be sure to check them out. It's now lunch break. We will reconvene at 1 p.m. here and hear from Michael de Saint-Charon. If you are one of the speakers, please make sure you find a Davis staff member, and we'll show you where to go and see everybody back here at 1.